Some people stand in the darkness, afraid to step into the light. Some people make videos about Baywatch, and suddenly we're at 200! It's the 200th Baywatching special, baby! Much like the 100th video, I thought I'd take some time to talk about Baywatch trivia. There have been things I've missed, things that have come up in the season since the 100th episode, and most importantly, there have been a few Baywatch documentaries since then. There has never been a better time to soak up some Baywatch knowledge. But before we take a look at some of those, here's a handful of things I've discovered via my own research. Did you know before Baywatch had their A&W product placement bonanza, they featured fake A&W on the show? R&M? I just find that very funny. They didn't know they could have had the real thing and the show would have been that much better for it. Did you know Billy Warlock doubled for Robin Williams on Happy Days? Well, now you do! And did you know that David Chokachi applied for the CIA? Well, he did! When Donna D'Errico started out, she wanted to be a comedian, but she thought she'd make more money as an actress. I would love to see her stand up. I am dying to know what her material is like. And in the episode Father's Day, I somehow missed that Logan's hypnotist was Michael Berk. And this isn't trivia per se, but I just had a question about an earlier episode. Why exactly is Newman hanging out at this high school huffing party? And I would be remiss if I did not mention the cameo of this horse taking a dump. When I covered Forbidden Paradise, Baywatch's first direct-to-video movie, I noted that the distributors wanted to do an R-rated version. According to Douglas Schwartz, they said they would never betray their family audience like that. And I theorized that what really happened was Hasselhoff made a stink about it. And surprise, surprise, I was 100% correct. According to Hasselhoff himself, via The Californian on September 24, 1995, "At first, they wanted us to do an R-rated version, and I said, no, if you do that, I'm not going to be in it. That's not what Baywatch is. Now, we have offers to do video releases on a family level on a continuing basis. I think you'll be seeing more."
My main contribution to the show, and something that I'm most proud of, is that I'm the one who really started fighting for the heartwarming stories. And I'm the one who said, look, I'm tired of all the jokes. I'm tired of defending people, defending the show. You know, we can't, we can't have the long lingering shots of the anatomies anymore. Please, we have to put something in there that's more based more on the reality of these guys as real life heroes.
This clip was from season 5. Hasselhoff had a long road ahead. I've already told the tale of Alexandra Paul begging to be killed off on the show and sitting in at her own funeral. But if things had gone differently, this would not have been the end of her Baywatch tenure. In 1996, the same year she left the show, the Baywatch producers created an unsold pilot starring Alexandra Paul called Daytona Beach. The plot is, I kid you not, about a beach cop who helps lifeguards and also drives in NASCAR. Alexandra Paul would not be a lifeguard, but an Air Force pilot who wants to be an astronaut. This sounds just insane. Incidentally, if you have a copy of this pilot, for the love of God, send it my way. But not every concept could have had the power of Baywatch Nights, the Baywatch spin-off that did get picked up. I've covered this show extensively, but only fairly recently discovered that apparently Baywatch favorite The Beach Boys were in talks to write the theme song. I don't know why things didn't work out, only that the Lou Rawls and David Hasselhoff classic that is After the Sun Goes Down would not have happened if not for this fateful parting of ways. Maybe it was a messy breakup. Perhaps that's why the Baywatch Nights Season 1 finale features an oddly mean-spirited copy of the Beach Boys who commit sexual assault and then get blown up. We can only speculate. As for the Beach Boys' Baywatch Nights theme song, well, there's this. According to Dan Spin, who uploaded this to YouTube, in 1995, the original Surviving Beach Boys re-entered the studio to record an album of new songs by Brian Wilson. At this time, Brian Wilson was recently liberated from the conservatorship of controversial therapist Dr. Eugene Landy and wanted to produce a new rock and roll record. One afternoon in Lake Tahoe, Brian Wilson and Mike Love met up and started writing a song together for the first time in over 10 years. In a single afternoon, they composed what could have been one of the band's greatest latter-day songs, Baywatch Nights. There was so much excitement about this new song that a camera crew was brought into the studio a week later to record Brian arranging and producing the song with Mike Love and other studio technicians. Later the same day, Carl Wilson showed up at the studio and played what would turn out to be some of the last guitar parts he'd record in his lifetime. Unfortunately, we do not know the rest of the story. What ended up materializing from the 1995 Beach Boys studio sessions was not an album's worth of new Brian Wilson songs, but instead a country duets album called Stars and Stripes. What exactly kept the band from finishing Baywatch Nights and never releasing it? We may never know. But here is a snippet of what was going on in the studio during this brief creative outburst. Like much of Baywatch Nights, this song is shrouded in mystery. But it's interesting to hear a little of what could have been. Anywho, you might have noticed an uptick in Baywatch interest lately, as there's been a handful of documentaries released in recent years. This video is by no means a comprehensive look at every Baywatch documentary, but I wanted to discuss and compare some of the more noteworthy ones. But before we get to the latest documentaries, I thought it'd be fun to go all the way back and see what crap they were peddling while the show was still on the air. Backstage at Baywatch is exactly what you'd expect from a pandering, behind-the-scenes video marketed toward Baywatch superfans, but they somehow managed to include real information nonetheless. This video follows the filming of one episode in particular, Season 5's The Runaways, which, I should note, is my favorite episode of Baywatch. I speculated that this was Baywatch's 100th episode filmed due to the star-studded nature and the fact 2 of its guest stars were at the 100th wrap party. But it seems Backstage at Baywatch disproves that theory. They actually give us an episode code, number 5020, meaning it was shot as the 20th episode of Season 5. It was aired as episode 21, but neither of those numbers makes it the 100th. I am once again at a loss as to what the hell their 100th episode was. The most watched show in the world, people! Each episode took 5 days to shoot, but they also shot scenes from several episodes simultaneously. This probably explains why scenes were sometimes shot in different seasons and then piped in later, since plots were so interchangeable. This happened on Baywatch a lot, but because this was filmed in the winter, the water was absolutely freezing. There's even a segment where David Charvet is asking about the number of takes and then jokingly mentions that people's lips start turning purple when they go too long. And like, haha?
Lips turn purple, and I think that we're in Alaska somewhere. It doesn't look very good, but...
I think he was just trying to soften the blow so it didn't sound so scary, but yikes. Some of the behind-the-scenes footage is just interesting to see, such as David Charvet being coached on a slow-motion boat dive, the crew being directed for some underwater shots, and Hasselhoff stand-in hanging out on a boat. Speaking of the Hoff, he says some things in this special that are somewhat expected but also baffling. For instance, he reiterates that Baywatch is not just a show about women in bikinis, which is true. Baywatch is also batshit insane. Hasselhoff would rather people focus on the heroic aspects of the show, and mentions people who were saved from drowning because of something they saw in Baywatch, which I believe is also true, and yay Baywatch. But then he says things that are kind of fudging the truth a little.
We won the Media Access Awards, which give awards to recognition for handicapped. And we won the best drama, which was Shattered, about a lifeguard in a wheelchair who broke his back, making a rescue a true story.
The lifeguard he's referring to is Mitch, who he plays. And unless Mitch is a real person, or the person they based this on miraculously regained their ability to walk via Pepsi, I feel like True Story is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. We did discover some of the inspiration behind Hasselhoff's magnificent music video in this episode.
Because this episode has such a strong English flavor, David decided to pay homage to the British musical theatre with this imaginative fantasy.
So I guess he was like, hey, there's English people around. How about we do Oliver Twist? To raise awareness for runaways or something. No Turning Back, the song performed by guest star Jane Collins, was apparently written specifically for this Baywatch episode. The songwriters were asked to theme it roughly around the episode's plot, but to leave it just vague enough that it could be a hit outside of the show. As you likely figured out, the public immediately rejected it. Oddly, though, the narrator claims that Jane Collins' character's plot is also based on a true story, because in real life, Jane Collins was promoting her music in LA. But that's not anything. Unfortunately, a majority of Backstage at Baywatch is dedicated to kissing billionaire Richard Branson's ass. If you want to see a douchebag rich guy get his ego stroked, this is the video for you. Unmentioned in this tape, however, is the fact Branson only got the role because he won it during a Children in Crisis charity auction. I had to find this out while reading Hasselhoff's autobiography like some kind of animal. I will save you an excruciating amount of time and summarize the 2 noteworthy things mentioned about Richard Branson's role here. During the section where he speaks to Gladys Knight on a video phone, they weren't sure who the hell he was going to be talking to yet. So they just shot it several different ways, depending on what genre of celebrity it might be.
Take 1. Branson, talking to someone very important. Take 2. He's talking to a pop star. Take 3. He's told to do a generic. Branson's confused, but ad-libs his lines again.
Richard Branson's record attempt in the episode was real, but despite the episode and Backstage at Baywatch claiming he broke the record, I can't find any record of this record, so that's a bit of bullshit too. Speaking of bullshit, in 2021, Dark Side of the 90s aired their episode on Baywatch. I'm a huge fan of Dark Side of the Ring, where Vice spotlights different wrestlers and events in wrestling history. As the title suggests, the stories are quite dark and often tragic. Dark Side of the 90s aimed to piggyback off of the success of Dark Side of the Ring, but with a different team in charge who had no idea why the parent show was noteworthy or good. Their 6th episode was about Baywatch, and I was not impressed. For something with Dark Side in the title, I found this documentary to be the nicest and most dishonest of the ones I'm discussing here. It's pretty difficult to document the absolute lows of a franchise if A, you're only interviewing 2 producers and 2 actors that were involved, and B, only one of them seems to be willing to talk about their story all that much. Dark Side of the 90s is frustratingly vague, basically just telling us how Baywatch came to be and then some general stuff about plastic surgery at the time. Baywatch absolutely contributed to the upswing in boob jobs in the 90s, but such a huge focus of this special is general statistics and not specifically anything about Baywatch.
There were also increases in other women going and having those implants removed. I'm not saying that she caused it, I'm just saying that it just so happened.
So much screen time is dedicated to random experts talking about things like how sex sells and how sexuality is used in advertising, which is just too broad a topic for something that's supposed to be about the seedy underbelly of the Baywatch world. Also, holy shit, are the stand-ins in the show just the worst. It's absolutely comical, the difference in quality when you look at the care put into Dark Side of the Ring, and then here you see this wild-ass Screech wig they've put on the Hoff double. I just wanted to note this before I proceeded because I don't want you to see any of these recreations unwarned. Okay, so first of all, despite the fact Douglas Schwartz is wearing a Baywatch Nights hat throughout this whole thing, never once is Baywatch Nights discussed, so that's hilarious. Secondly, Michael Berk tells the story of how Baywatch was created, but this is at best bending the truth, and at worst just an outright lie. As we all know, Gregory Bonann originally came up with the idea in the 70s while he was lifeguarding. But the way Michael Berk tells it, he says he and Douglas Schwartz were just high on the beach and got inspired by a rescue they witnessed. They only mention Gregory Bonann as a third partner that they filmed the pitch video with. making no mention of him being the show's creator or even a former lifeguard. Berk tells the exact same story in After Baywatch, but After Baywatch actually has a little bit of integrity and adds the context that they didn't come up with the idea themselves.
So Doug and I went to the beach, smoke a joint, walking on the beach trying to think of what kind of show can we do when we see a lifeguard run down a tower, running into the surf, and here come these yellow trucks with lights and sirens and boats are coming from offshore. No one ever thought of this before.
What is true is that when the show was canceled after season 1, the Baywatch creators bought the rights back from Grant Tinker, former CEO of NBC, for approximately $10, which is amazing. But back to the half-lies. So when Pamela Anderson was hired, Hasselhoff said no because he didn't want people paying more attention to her boobs than him. It's pretty obvious from interviews that he resented her a little bit for the type of attention she brought to the show. But according to Michael Berk, Hasselhoff quickly came around when he realized she was great and people weren't just paying attention to her boobs. Lie. In general, there's just a lot of sugar-coated, corporate-speak type quotes from Schwartz and Berk throughout this, which really just are the opposite of what you expect from the premise of this show. I mean, Pamela Anderson's abusive marriage to Tommy Lee is pretty dark, but apparently, according to Berk, it was a fairy tale romance.
And it was this, fairy tale romance.
I'm not going to quote everything from them, but it's terrible. Of the 4 people they interviewed that have any direct relation to Baywatch, only Jeremy Jackson seems willing to really discuss himself all that deeply. Michael Berk and Douglas Schwartz just talk up the creation of Baywatch, and Gena Lee Nolin, strangely, does not say much about herself at all. Which, no one is owed anyone else's life. But there are other parts of her story that are public already and she doesn't get into. For instance, on the True Hollywood Story special, they talk about the fact Gena Lee Nolin had such bad stage fright that they brought in a hypnotist to help her. I don't think she was ever really comfortable as an actress, despite the fact I found her quite good personally, since she did Sheena and then largely quit the business. This may also be because the press was absolutely insane at the time. The producers had her stage a fight with Pamela Anderson to get some coverage for the show, and the press went to Nolan's mother's house to try and get the story. And during her entire time on Baywatch, she was dealing with an undiagnosed thyroid condition on top of unhealthy eating to maintain her figure for the show. The latter part of that she does discuss in Dark Side of the 90s, but she also says, unlike other actresses on the show, she didn't have anything in her contract about maintaining her weight. I'm not sure why she would be the exception. Perhaps she didn't remember right, or perhaps they were just inconsistent. But also, I think Gena Lee Nolin is just saying things to say things sometimes, because some of her interview quotes are a little confusing.
Borderline playmates running around in the sand. I can see why it was popular.
I don't think a lot of the Baywatch women were borderline playmates. They were actual playmates, including Gena Lee Nolin. She also claims that except for the boob jobs, everyone on Baywatch was natural, because fillers and Botox didn't exist then. And that is just not true. And what even is that statement? Everyone was natural except for the plastic surgery? What are you saying? But Jeremy Jackson, both in this and after Baywatch, has a lot of things to say about himself. In one of the few useful things about the Dark Side of the 90s episode, they highlighted how the men on the show were also affected by body image issues. Jeremy Jackson was still a child, and producers were telling him to diet, and he was being encouraged to have abs, which is a shitty thing to do to anyone, but especially a kid. And according to Douglas Schwartz, they were the only show on television featuring men's bodies.
Guys would wear trunks, so their bodies would be featured. And we were the only show on television doing that.
What are you ever talking about? But that's not the main focus of Jeremy Jackson's interviews. I've only briefly mentioned some of this during the course of Baywatching, but now is probably a good time to get into it. Whatever comes to mind when you think of former child actors of the 90s, it applies to Jeremy Jackson. He was in a terrible environment for a kid. He was exposed to too much money and fame and adult activities way too soon, and he had all of the problems associated with it. He's been in trouble with the law for several different things, but first and foremost, he had a huge drug problem, namely meth. And if you know anything about meth addiction, you know it's rough. In fact, that was what contributed to him quitting the show. He was feeling resentful of being featured less as he got older. He'd been up for 5 days high on meth, and when Hasselhoff asked him one day if he was smoking pot, he just lost it and walked off set. He went to rehab several times during the course of the show and after, but it took him a long time to get clean. As far as I know, he's currently sober and working as a drug and alcohol counselor, and good for him. This episode of Dark Side of the 90s kind of stinks though, so let's move on. This isn't exactly a Baywatch documentary, but I did want to take a brief moment to discuss Pamela, a Love Story. This is a documentary all about Pamela Anderson, as told by her, and I highly recommend it. After that terrible Pam and Tommy series, and all of the tabloid stories about her life, it was great to see her be able to tell her own story. It seems she's taken her power back and discovered herself again. And also, if you haven't been paying attention, she was nominated for a Golden Globe for her performance in The Last Showgirl. She's come a long way, baby. The documentary covers her whole life, so naturally, some of it features Baywatch. She was contacted through Playboy to audition, but she didn't bother to show up about 11 times. This is wild. The documentaries I'm covering are using clips from other documentaries I've covered. Anywho, she eventually got cast, and she admits that she doesn't think her acting or the direction was very good. She also mentions that there was a person whose job it was to throw crackers and attract seagulls for shots, which is amazing. Most of the interesting information about Baywatch here involves the people she was dating at the time. When she was cast, she was seeing David Charvet. He was upset because he thought them working together would make them bored of each other and ruin the relationship, which is exactly what happened. I already knew this part going into the documentary, but I didn't know that she also dated Kelly Slater off and on during the show. Both of them were seeing several people, and he was apparently the first person she called after suddenly marrying Tommy Lee. She also gets deeper into Tommy Lee's horrid behavior on set while she was on Baywatch, finding the call sheets to stalk her, and her asking them to rewrite scenes to avoid more conflict. It's pretty ass, and he sucks. And now we come to the latest and longest documentary, After Baywatch, Moment in the Sun. This project has been filming for several years, but it only just got released in 2024. I won't cover every single little bit of it because I encourage you to watch it for yourself, but I'd like to discuss some noteworthy parts. Despite this documentary being 4 episodes and just over 3 hours long, it by no means talks to everyone involved with Baywatch. Considering they went on for 11 seasons plus 2 of nights and had a rotating cast, that makes sense. But they do cover quite a lot. They talked about many things I already knew and many things I didn't. Some parts were even quite touching. I do think, however, there was an excessive amount of screen time dedicated to Carmen Electra, who, respectfully, I don't feel contributed all that much to the show or this documentary.
I'm proud of that. Fuck yeah, I'm a Baywatch bitch and I love it. I think Baywatch was ahead of its time because men were featured and men looked hot.
In comparison to Carmen Electra's screen time, Pamela Anderson is there for like 2 seconds, and they reuse the same quotes from her a lot, which might just mean she didn't shoot much with them, but still. Gena Lee Nolin is also here, once again saying things that aren't really true.
Jason Momoa, he is the one that exploded off of Baywatch.
Girl, no. Speaking of things that aren't true, here's Michael Berk discussing the pilot movie. He says Brandon Tartikoff required them to have Panic and Pier in the title. The movie was called Panic at Malibu Pier, and then follows it with this.
No panic, no pier, but that was the title because Brandon wanted that.
What? There was both Panic and a pier. The climax of the main plot was a knife fight under the pier? Again, what are you talking about, man? I must give a shout out to David Chokachi, because I give him somewhat of a hard time for coming off dumb on Baywatch. I mean, everyone comes off dumb, but still. He seems like a cool guy in all of these interviews and pretty chill with everything. And if you want to hear him discuss his battle with weather-related shrinkage, this is the doc for you. One of the best parts of the documentary was hearing everyone's respect for Michael Newman. You can tell he really was loved, and it was nice to see him get his flowers near the end. He'd been struggling with Parkinson's since 2006, and he knew he didn't have much time left. In fact, these were the last interviews he ever gave. He died 2 months after the documentary aired. I'm glad that people got to see how great he was before he passed. He was a lifeguard, a firefighter, and a father, and his son is following in his footsteps. You can't ask for a greater legacy than that. Not only was Numi an Ironman triathlete, but so was Alexandra Paul. I've always loved her in interviews, but she somehow manages to come off cooler and cooler every time. She was close friends with Jaason Simmons, who was in the closet at the time. In the 90s, being outed as gay could destroy your career, so Alexandra Paul pretended to be his girlfriend to keep the paparazzi away. She also repeatedly asked the producers to give her character a boyfriend of color. When they finally did give her one, she asked if he could not be a gang member, so they rewrote him as a former gang member. Knowing this makes how she acts in Forbidden Paradise make a lot of sense. If they weren't going to give her a boyfriend of color without stereotyping him, fuck it, she was just gonna make up her own relationship in the background. There's a large section of this doc where they discuss Baywatch and their relationship with race, their failures, and their attempts at representation. Apparently, they were under some pressure by the NAACP, which is why they ended up casting Traci Bingham as Jordan. I gathered that much, but what I didn't know was that they also cast Ingrid Walters because of this. Her character Cheryl has been in a few episodes that I've covered, but I didn't really talk about her because she's basically an extra. And I had no idea that she was also a qualified lifeguard and that they'd used her experiences for the show. In fact, some of the things she says in After Baywatch were stories used for Jordan. By far, the most powerful part of this documentary was hearing Gregory Alan Williams tell his story. He has just such a great way of speaking. I find him compelling no matter what he's talking about, even if it's something kind of stupid.
People say it's the TNA, well, you're darn right it was. Also because this show was about rescue, and because the writers were writing about those things.
But the more I hear about Gregory Alan Williams, the more I really think Baywatch did him a disservice. He's by far one of the most successful people who came out of Baywatch, and I would say the best actor, but he was constantly hampered by, frankly, some racist bullshit. He was told he couldn't get too fit, lest he make his other co-stars look bad. He was excluded from certain shoots. This wasn't mentioned in the documentary, but the fact he was let go from Baywatch Nights, the show that was written with the idea of him being the main co-star in mind, is pretty sucky. He saved someone's life during the LA riots, and Baywatch didn't even think to capitalize on that, even by just giving him more screen time. It sounds like there were a lot of microaggressions, if not outright blatant racism, that were weighing him down. But Gregory Alan Williams has truly made a success for himself. I'm glad he could get some of this off of his chest, and the essay he wrote for his daughter was really beautiful. I'd encourage watching this documentary just for his parts alone. Which brings me once again to Jeremy Jackson. The most interesting part of his story to me was seeing his relationship with David Hasselhoff. Jackson grew up poor with a single mom, and he was a huge fan of Knight Rider. At the auditions, he told David Hasselhoff that he didn't need a dad, and that really touched him. You can see how profoundly the two of them affected each other, becoming like a real father and son, so much so that they're still close today. But the car he gave him for his 16th birthday that was used in the show wasn't actually given to him? That's brutal. Oh, this was a good one though. Apparently Jeremy Jackson was constantly asking for free Adidas merch, and Hasselhoff made fun of him for his Adidas thing, which is hilarious considering the Hoff plugged Adidas so much it made it into the intro for Baywatch Nights Season 2. He also wrote at least part of the song You Can Run for Jeremy Jackson, because the lyrics were referencing Adidas shoes. He was the one who encouraged Jackson to have his own music career, and Jackson was happy to do it because he wanted to follow in his hero's footsteps. I did find it odd when Michael Berk was explaining that he based Hobie and Mitch's relationship on his relationship with his own son, and he didn't explain that said son was cast as one of Hobie's friends on the show. There's also an extremely creepy part of the documentary where Jeremy Jackson talks about sneaking into the actresses' trailers and smelling their dirty bathing suits, especially Nicole Edgar's, who he eventually briefly dated as an adult. So, I wish I could unlearn this information. Here's where we get to the bulk of Jeremy Jackson's story, though, and that's, unfortunately, his problems with drugs and alcohol. I mentioned before that he's gotten sober and turned his life around, and I think that's really great. I will say, however, I do think that there's perhaps a little too much focus in this documentary on turning his image around, which isn't to say that someone shouldn't have any second chances, only that it skims over some of the things he did, which is kind of important to know. For instance, he didn't just go to prison because of drugs. He stabbed a woman in 2015. And I think Nicole Eggert emphasizing rehabilitation over imprisonment is a good point, but the framing of the section, I would say, is a little dishonest. This focus on Jeremy Jackson, I think, is in part because Nicole Eggert was a producer and the two of them are extremely close. There's still a good story here. Knowing this just affected how I viewed the documentary as a whole. As for Nicole Eggert, all of these interviews confirm to me that she's one of the coolest people ever. I just found her life really fascinating, and I'm glad she seems to have followed the path she wants regardless of what other people think. And, unfortunately, she's currently battling breast cancer. I really hope things work out for the best. And it's great she brought everyone together for this series so they can tell people who they are and what happened.
The show, it really wasn't good, but we made it good.
There were plenty of things in this documentary I didn't discuss, and people they interviewed that didn't come up. And I think you should watch it to find out what you missed. Out of all of the documentaries discussed here, it's probably got the most information. I would say you should pair it with the True Hollywood Story episode on Baywatch, because that's honestly the best Baywatch documentary I've seen. It was made just after the show had wrapped, but before the Hawaiian wedding movie, and people were feeling very honest during these interviews. The reason I didn't discuss it more at length during this video is because I've honestly used info from it a ton during the course of Baywatching, and I'm sure it'll have plenty more use down the line. If you can find a copy of it, it's worth checking out. Also, they discuss Baywatch Nights, which has been criminally forgotten in all of these other docs. Well, this video wasn't good, but we made it good. Thanks for sticking around for 200 episodes, people, and I'll see you next time. Next time on Baywatch, it's a rookie episode. Are you ready for 300 new characters to be added to the show? It's busy!